Before we start, kindly subscribe to my channel and tell me, where in the universe are you watching from? Kai Voss stood among towering stone pillars, his heart pounding as the alien crowd stared at him. The funeral flames still burned behind him, lighting up the night with flickering orange and blue hues. He barely had time to grieve before a group of armored warriors approached. The war matron, an older, battle-scarred woman with an air of authority, held out a thick ceremonial tablet carved from dark stone. Her piercing gaze locked onto him as she spoke in a deep, commanding voice. "You are Kai Voss, sworn brother of Jacqueline of House Korvik." Kai swallowed. Yes. He was my friend." The war matron nodded solemnly, then turned the tablet so he could see the glowing symbols etched onto its surface. "Then, by the ancient laws of Verakai, you inherit his most sacred duty. His sisters now stand as your wives." Silence. Kai blinked. His brain refused to process the words correctly. I what? Murmurs rippled through the gathered warriors, some amused, some unimpressed. From behind a war matron, 3 figures stepped forward. He could feel their stares, each one assessing him like a creature under examination. "This is a joke, right?" Kai let out a nervous chuckle, glancing around, hoping someone would laugh. No one did. Instead, a massive warrior nearby grunted. "Do you deny his honor?" Kai turned back to the war matron. "Okay, hold on. Let's just slow down. I was Jacqueline's friend, sure, but that doesn't mean I inherit his family." The war matron's expression remained impassive. "It is law. To refuse would bring dishonor upon them. Unless," she tilted her head slightly, "unless you wish to challenge the claim in combat." Kai exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his face. This was bad. He had zero intention of fighting 7-foot-tall alien warriors over some ancient marriage law he didn't even understand. But refusing would ruin the honor of the sisters, and from the way the crowd watched him, honor mattered here more than air. One of the sisters stepped closer. She moved with the controlled grace of a warrior, each step measured. Velkaza, the eldest. Her voice was low and firm. "You hesitate." Kai looked at her. "Of course I hesitate. I just got told I'm married to 3 alien women 5 minutes after my best friend's funeral. You have to admit, that's a lot to process." Mirakai, the second sister, folded her arms. "If you are unworthy, say so now." Kai caught a mischievous glint in her eyes, like she was testing him. The youngest, Talisa, simply grinned. "I like him," she announced. "He looks funny when he's confused." Kai groaned. "Look, I don't want to dishonor anyone, okay? But I'm human. This isn't how things work where I'm from." Velkaza narrowed her eyes. "Then learn how we work." Before Kai could respond, a spear suddenly whistled through the air, straight at his head. Years of survival instinct kicked in. He barely managed to twist out of the way before the spear embedded itself into the ground where he'd been standing. His heart slammed against his ribs. Velkaza raised an eyebrow. "At least you're not completely useless." Kai stared at the spear, then at the warriors who looked at him expectantly. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that this wasn't going away. Somehow, someway, he was going to have to survive being married to 3 alien warrior women. And judging by the looks they were giving him, they weren't going to make it easy. Kai Voss couldn't believe what was happening. Just an hour ago, he had come to honor his fallen friend. Now he was apparently married to 3 alien warrior women by some ancient law. If he refused, it would disgrace them. If he challenged it, he'd have to fight, and probably die. There had to be a way out of this. Velkaza, the eldest sister, watched him closely. She didn't trust him yet. He could feel it. Her sharp gaze was always analyzing, always waiting for him to show weakness. She expected him to run. Mirakai, the second sister, was different. She studied him like a puzzle to solve, as if deciding whether he could be useful. Talisa, the youngest, looked way too entertained by the whole situation. "I still don't get it," Kai muttered, rubbing his temples. What exactly do you expect me to do? I'm just a trader. I'm not some warrior like Jacqueline. Mirake smirked. Then why did he name you? Kai froze. That was a good question. Jacqueline had always talked about honor, strength, and tradition. If he chose Kai for something this important, maybe he saw something in him. Still, that didn't mean Kai was ready to be a husband, let alone to 3 battle-trained alien women. Velkaza crossed her arms. You have 3 options, human. Kai looked at her warily. Let me guess. 1. I fight and die. She nodded. 2. You accept your duty. Kai hesitated. And the 3rd. Mirake's expression turned amused. You run, but if you do, we will hunt you. Taliza clapped her hands together. That would be fun. Kai groaned. Of course, this wouldn't be easy. I need time to think, he said finally. Velkaza gave a curt nod. Then we shall return home. You will decide soon enough. Home. Oh no, that sounded way too permanent. Before Kai could protest, Mirakai grabbed his wrist and pulled him forward. Come, husband, she teased. You wouldn't want to dishonor us by making a scene. Kai let out a sigh and followed. What had he gotten himself into? A warrior's home. Kai expected a stone fortress, maybe a dark, cold war camp. Instead, their home was surprisingly elegant. Massive halls, carved pillars, and banners displaying their family's warrior sigil. It was equal parts intimidating and beautiful. The moment they entered, a group of young warriors stared at Kai like he was a strange animal. Is that him? One whispered. A human. He looks so small. Kai huffed. I can hear you, you know. Mirake chuckled. Velkaza turned to him. You will sleep here. She motioned toward a large chamber with a single oversized bed. Kai blinked. Wait. One bed. Taliza grinned. You're our husband, aren't you? Kay's face burned. Aye, fats. Back on Earth, we don't just. Velkaza rolled her eyes. Then sleep on the floor. Kai groaned. This was going to be a long night. The morning challenge. Kai woke up feeling sore from the hard stone floor. The sound of metal clashing echoed from outside. Curious, he stepped out to see Velkaza training with a group of warriors. She moved with perfect precision, dodging strikes and countering effortlessly. Even from a distance, Kai could tell she was stronger and faster than any human fighter he'd ever seen. Mirake approached him, arms folded. Do you want to know your first duty? Kai sighed. Do I have a choice? No, she said with a smirk. She pointed toward a large courtyard where warriors were gathering. A combat trial was about to begin. Your first test as our husband, she explained, is to prove your worth. Kai tensed. And how do I do that? Mirake grinned. Simple. You fight. Kai almost passed out. Velkaza stepped forward, gripping a wooden training weapon. She tossed it toward him, and he barely caught it. You're our mate now, human, she said, her voice firm. If you want to stay, you must show you belong. Kai looked at the warriors around him, each one bigger and deadlier than him. This was it, his first challenge. And if he failed, he had a feeling they wouldn't let him walk away. Kai tightened his grip on the wooden training weapon. The arena around him buzzed with anticipation. Warriors gathered, eager to see how the fragile human would handle himself. Across from him, a massive opponent stood, cracking his knuckles. The warrior was at least a head taller than Kai, his muscles rippling under his armor. The crowd muttered in amusement, clearly expecting a quick fight. Mirake smirked from the sidelines. Try not to embarrass yourself, husband. Kai scowled. Oh, thanks for the support. Velkaza, standing with arms crossed, watched him like a hawk. Begin, she commanded. Kai barely had time to react before his opponent charged like a battering ram. Think fast. Kai dodged to the side, barely avoiding the first strike. The warrior swung again, his wooden weapon whistling through the air. Kai ducked and stumbled backward, his instincts screaming at him to get out of there. Laughter erupted from the crowd. His opponent grinned. Too slow, human. Kai exhaled. All right. I can't overpower him, but I can outthink him. His mind flashed back to bar fights on rough space stations, to the street brawls he had survived back on Earth. He wasn't the strongest, but he knew how to win ugly. The warrior swung again, this time aiming for Kai's legs. Instead of jumping away, Kai threw himself forward, rolling under the attack and coming up inside his opponent's guard. Before the warrior could react, Kai slammed his wooden weapon into the man's knee. The warrior roared in pain and staggered. Gasps rippled through the watching crowd. The laughter stopped. Mirake grinned. Interesting. Kai didn't waste time celebrating. He had one shot to end this. As the warrior tried to regain balance, Kai swung again, hitting his ribs, then followed up with a quick jab to the stomach. The warrior grunted and collapsed to one knee, breathless. Silence. Kai stepped back, panting. Still think I'm slow? The crowd erupted in shouts and cheers. Some warriors looked impressed. Others looked annoyed. Talisa clapped excitedly. That was fun. Do it again. Kai groaned. His whole body ached, but he had won. Velkaza studied him for a long moment. Then, with the faintest nod, she turned to the gathered warriors. The human is not useless, she declared. For now. Kai exhaled in relief. That was probably the closest thing to a compliment he was going to get from her. Mirakai walked up and patted him on the shoulder. Not bad, husband. Maybe you'll survive after all. Kai gave a weak chuckle. Great. Love the confidence. Velkaza's eyes remained on him. This was just the beginning. You will train every day. You will become stronger. Kai sighed. Figures. Talisa grinned. At least now they won't kill you in your sleep. Kai froze. That was an option. Mirake smirked. Of course, if you had failed, we would have claimed dishonor. Kai groaned again. I really need a drink. Velkaza turned. Then come. Tonight, we celebrate. A strange celebration. That night, Kai sat at a massive banquet table, surrounded by warriors eating, drinking, and laughing. Roaring fires lit the great hall, casting shadows across the stone walls. The food was surprisingly good, though Kai wasn't sure what half of it was. Mirake nudged him. You should eat more. You'll need strength. For more fights. Kai mumbled through a bite. For other things, Mirake said with a teasing smirk. Kai choked on his drink. Talisa giggled. You're fun when you panic. Velkaza sat across from him, silent as ever, her sharp eyes watching his every move. Finally, she spoke. You won today. But do not mistake one victory for strength. You are still weak. Kai put down his drink. And yet, I'm still your husband. A tense silence settled between them. A challenge. A test. Then, for the first time, Velkaza smirked. For now. Kai didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. One thing was certain. This marriage was going to be the hardest fight of his life. Kai never thought surviving a fight would be the easiest part of his day. The celebration had gone late into the night. Warriors drank, ate, and shared stories of great battles. Kai had tried to keep up, but his body ached all over from the fight earlier. Every time he moved, something protested in pain. And now, morning had arrived far too soon. A loud knock pounded on his door. Kai Voss. Velkaza's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. You will wake. Kai groaned, burying his face into the blanket. 5 more minutes. The door slammed open. Velkaza stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Weakness does not suit you. Kai sat up with a sigh, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. You know, most people let their husband wake up on his own. Velkaza didn't even blink. You are not most people. You are ours. Kai swallowed, suddenly very aware of what that meant. The reality of his situation still felt surreal. He had 3 wives now, and not just any wives, but warrior women who expected him to be strong, smart, and capable. No pressure, right? Mirakai leaned against the doorway beside Velkaza, a smirk on her lips. Hurry, husband. Your training begins today. Kai frowned. I already won my fight. Why do I need more training? Velkaza stepped closer, her presence intimidating even without weapons. Because you are still unworthy. Kai sighed. Yeah, I figured you'd say that. Taliza poked her head in, grinning. This will be fun. Or terrible. Depends on how much you cry. Kai groaned. This was going to be a long day. Training with warriors. The training ground was a large open courtyard, surrounded by stone walls and banners bearing the family cycle. Other warriors trained nearby, their movements swift and powerful. Velkaza handed Kai a wooden sword. Show me your stance. Kai held up the weapon, copying what he had seen in old combat vids. Velkaza frowned. Terrible. Kai blinked. Wow, no sugarcoating, huh? She circled him like a predator judging its prey. Your balance is weak. Your grip is wrong. And your stance. She shook her head. Laughable. Mirake chuckled from the sidelines. At least he's amusing. Velkazev ignored her and struck without warning. Kai barely dodged. The wooden blade whooshed past his face. He stumbled backward, nearly losing his grip on his own weapon. Hey, no warning. Kai protested. Velkaz's eyes narrowed slightly. An enemy will not give you one. Kai exhaled, adjusting his grip. Fine. If she wanted serious, he'd be serious. She attacked again. Kai blocked clumsily, but the impact stung his arms. He tried to counterattack, but Velkaza moved too fast, deflecting his strike effortlessly. A few watching warriors chuckled. Taliza called out, swing faster, Kai, or just close your eyes and hope for the best. Kai gritted his teeth. He wasn't going to be a joke. He focused. Instead of trying to overpower Velkaza, he watched her movements. Waited. Looked for an opening. And then there. She swung high. Instead of blocking, Kai ducked low, rolling to the side, and tapping her leg with his weapon. It wasn't a hard hit, but it landed. The crowd went silent. Velkaza stopped, looking down at where Kai had struck. Kai straightened, gripping his sword tight, still laughable. For a moment, Velkaza simply stared at him. Then, to his shock, she smirked. Better. Mirake whistled. Our husband learns. Talisa clapped. I knew he wasn't completely useless. Kai sighed in relief. Maybe, just maybe, he had a chance at surviving this insane new life. A private conversation. That night, Kai found himself on a balcony overlooking the city, the alien skyline glowing under the stars. Velkaza approached, silent as ever. You fought well today, she said finally. Kai glanced at her. Wow, a compliment. Am I dying? Velkaza exhaled, almost like she was holding back a chuckle. Do not expect another. Kai leaned on the railing. You don't think I belong here, do you? Velkaza was quiet for a moment. Then, no, not yet. Kai looked at her, meeting her gaze. Then what do I have to do? She studied him, eyes sharp. Prove that you are more than an outsider, that you are worthy of us. Kai let out a slow breath. No pressure. Velkaza turned to leave but paused. Sleep well, Kai Voss. Then she was gone. Kai stared after her, his heart pounding just a little too fast. Kai woke up to the sound of clashing weapons and loud voices outside. He groaned, rolling onto his side. His body still ached from training, and he had barely slept. The warrior culture of his new home didn't believe in rest days. Before he could drift back into sleep, his door slammed open. Again. This time, it was Mirakai. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a playful smirk on her lips. Rise and shine, husband. Kai pulled the blanket over his head. Let me guess. More training. No. She strolled into the room, grabbing his blanket and ripping it off him. It's time for your first duty as our husband. Kai blinked. Wait, duty? What duty? Mirake grinned. Diplomacy. A meeting of clans. Kai followed Mirake through the great hall. The warriors inside were buzzing with conversation, their eyes sharp with anticipation. Velkaza and Taliza were already seated at a long table at the front of the room. Across from them sat 3 warriors from another clan, their armor marked with a different sigil. Kai whispered to Murakai, "Okay, explain. What's going on?" "A trade negotiation," she said. "Our clans are supposed to exchange supplies, but they also want something else." Kai frowned. "And what does that have to do with me?" Mirake smirked. "You're the husband of Velkaza, Taliza, and myself. That means you represent our house now." Kai froze. "Wait, you expect me to negotiate? I barely understand your customs." Velkaza glanced at him. "And yet, you are here." Kai sighed, stepping forward. "No pressure, right?" The opposing warriors studied him, their expressions unreadable. Finally, their leader, a broad-shouldered warrior with deep scars along his arms, spoke. "You are the human." Kai sat down across from him. "That's me." The warrior eyed him for a moment, then grunted. "Strange choice for a husband." Kai forced a smile. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Velkaza cleared her throat. "Enough talk. The trade agreement must be settled." The other clan's leader nodded. "We will offer food and medicine. But in return, we want stronger weapons." Velkaza's expression hardened. That was not part of the original agreement. Tension filled the air. The warriors beside the clan leader stiffened. The mood in the room grew dangerous. Kai felt the shift immediately. This wasn't just business. This was a test of strength. Kai leaned forward. "If I may." The opposing warriors turned their eyes to him. Kai smiled casually. "You want weapons. We want resources. But if we give you weapons, what stops you from using them against us?" The warrior leader narrowed his eyes. "Are you calling us dishonorable?" Kai raised a hand. "Not at all. But a wise leader plans ahead. What if instead of weapons, we offer training?" Mirake raised a brow. Velkaza remained silent, watching. The warrior leader frowned. "Training?" Kai nodded. "Our warriors will train yours in better combat techniques. That way, you grow stronger without relying on our weapons." The leader stroked his chin, considering. Kai held his breath. He had no idea if this would work. But if there was one thing he knew about warriors, it was that pride mattered more than anything. Finally, the leader chuckled. "Clever, human. You offer strength without giving us the tools to betray you." Kai exhaled in relief. Velkaza nodded. "Do you accept?" The warrior leader grinned. "We do." The tension in the room eased. Warriors from both sides began discussing the details. Mirake nudged Kai. "Well done. You might not be as useless as we thought." Kai sighed. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all week." Talisa clapped. "I knew he wouldn't ruin everything." Kai shook his head. 1 crisis avoided. 100 more to go. Kai had barely finished celebrating his negotiation victory when his next problem arrived. Literally. A messenger stormed into the hall, armor scratched from a long journey. He kneeled before Velkaza, Mirakai, and Taliza. "My lady, I bring urgent news." Velkaza stood immediately. "Speak." The messenger's voice was grim. "The Bloodfang clan challenges your household. They claim your new husband is an unworthy outsider and demand a trial." Silence fell over the hall. Kai blinked. "Wait, hold on. Another fight. I already did my trial." Mirake sighed, rubbing her forehead. Apparently, 1 was not enough. Taliza grinned. "This will be fun." Kai groaned. Of course, this would happen. The challenge. Later that evening, Kai stood in the great courtyard, surrounded by hundreds of warriors. The Bloodfang clan had arrived. Their leader, a towering brute named Vorzel, grinning like a predator. "I do not acknowledge your right to our honored warrior women," Vorzel sneered. "Fight me, or admit you are a coward and leave." Kai exhaled. He glanced at Velkaza. "Am I allowed to say no?" She met his gaze, serious. "If you refuse, you will shame us." Kai sighed. "Yeah, I figured." Vorzel cracked his knuckles. "I will break you, little human." Kai rolled his shoulders. "You're welcome to try." A loud gong sounded. The fight had begun. Brains versus brawn. Vorzel charged like a beast, swinging his massive fists. Kai dodged, barely. The wind from the punch rushed past his face. If that hit him, he'd be out cold in seconds. He needed a plan. Fast. Vorzel swung again. This time, Kai ducked low, letting the brute's momentum carry him forward. Then, Kai struck, a quick jab to the ribs. It was like punching a wall. Kai winced. "Ow." Vorzel grinned. Weak. Kai barely had time to react before Vorzel grabbed him and threw him across the courtyard. Kai hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Pain shot through his side. The crowd murmured. Some warriors laughed. Taliza called out, "Are you dead yet?" Kai groaned. "Not yet." Vorzel stomped toward him. "I expected more." Kai gritted his teeth. "Yeah, well, I expected less." Vorzel frowned. "What?" Kai grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it into Vorzel's eyes. The brute roared, stumbling back. Mirake gasped. "That's cheating." Velkaza's eyes narrowed. "No, that is strategy." Kai used the distraction. He rushed forward, jumped onto Vorzel's back, and wrapped his arm around the warrior's thick neck. Vorzel thrashed like a wild beast. "Get off me." Kai held on, squeezing with all his strength. If brute force wouldn't win, then technique would. Slowly, Vorzel's movements slowed. His roars turned into gasps. His knees buckled. And then he collapsed. Silence. Then the crowd erupted in cheers. Kai rolled off Vorzel, gasping for breath. He had won. Velkaza stepped forward, offering him her hand. "You fought well." Kai took it, pulling himself up. "Can we stop with the fights now?" Mirake smirked. "Maybe." Taliza grinned. "Depends on who challenges you next." Kai groaned. This was his life now, wasn't it? Kai sat on the edge of a stone bench in the warrior hall, still catching his breath. His entire body ached from the fight with Vorzel. Victory felt great, but pain, not so much. Velkaza stood nearby, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Mirake and Taliza sat across from him, grinning. "You actually won," Mirake said, shaking her head. "I was almost certain we'd have to carry you home in pieces." Taliza giggled. "I was completely certain of that." Kai groaned. "Glad I could surprise you." He rubbed his sore shoulder. "Now tell me, does this mean I get some peace and quiet?" Velkaza tilted her head. "For now." Kai exhaled in relief. Then the doors to the hall burst open. A warrior rushed inside, his breath heavy. "An envoy from the High Council has arrived." Velkaza straightened. Mirake's smirk disappeared. Kai blinked. "High Council. That sounds important." Velkaza turned to him, her voice serious. "It is. If they are here, it means something has changed." Kai sighed. "Great, and I just finished one crisis." The envoy's message. Minutes later, a group of armored figures entered the hall. Their robes were marked with the insignia of the High Council, the ruling authority over all the warrior clans. Their leader, a tall warrior with piercing golden eyes, stepped forward. Velkaza, Mirake, Taliza, and the human husband. Kai muttered, "I love how I'm always introduced like that." The envoy ignored him. "The council has observed recent events. the human's survival against the trials, his victory over Vorzul. And now we must determine whether his presence strengthens your household or endangers it. Kai stiffened. That didn't sound good. Velka's voice was steady. He has proven himself. The envoy's gaze shifted to Kai. Proven, perhaps, but his true test is yet to come. Kai swallowed. There's another test. The envoy continued. The council will host an official gathering. There, the leaders of all clans will judge whether you are a worthy mate or an insult to our traditions. Mirake muttered, politics. Always politics. Talisa sighed. I prefer the fighting. Kai felt a headache forming. And if they decide I'm an insult? The envoy's golden eyes gleamed. Then you will be banished. Silence filled the room. Kai exhaled slowly. All right. No pressure. Velkaza stepped forward, her tone sharp. We accept the challenge. Kai looked at her. We do. She glanced at him, her eyes steady. Yes. Kai nodded, though deep inside, he was already wondering how he'd survive this one. A private conversation. Later that night, Kai sat alone in his quarters, deep in thought. He had barely adjusted to his new life, and now he had to convince an entire council not to throw him into space. The door creaked open. He turned to see Velkaza enter, her posture as composed as ever. But something about her eyes was softer. She sat beside him. Are you afraid? Kai sighed. Afraid? No. Worried? Absolutely. She studied him for a moment. Then, to his surprise, she placed a hand on his. You have already done more than anyone expected, she said, and I do not regret choosing you. Kai stared at her. Was that a compliment? From Velkaza. He smirked. That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me. She scoffed. Do not get used to it. But she didn't move her hand away. Kai felt his heart beat a little faster. For the first time since arriving in this strange world, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like he belonged. The Grand Hall of the High Council was a towering masterpiece of alien craftsmanship. Enormous banners of different warrior clans hung from the ceiling, each symbolizing a family's honor. At the center of the chamber stood a long stone table where the most powerful clan leaders sat in judgment. Kai adjusted the ceremonial cloak Velkaza had forced him to wear. It felt heavy, like the weight of the entire trial itself had settled on his shoulders. Mirakai leaned toward him. Try not to say anything stupid. Kai whispered back. That's like asking the sun not to shine. Velkaza, standing beside him, exhaled. You will not face this alone. We stand as one. Talisa grinned. And if things go badly, I say we fight our way out. Kai wasn't sure if she was joking. The council leader, a gray-haired warrior with piercing silver eyes, stood. His voice boomed across the chamber. This gathering has been called to determine whether the human, Kai, is a worthy mate to the daughters of the honored Velzeri house. Kai cleared his throat. Wow, when you say it like that, it sounds very serious. The council leader gave him a sharp look. Velkaza jabbed him in the ribs. He winced. Right. I'll be quiet now. The leader continued. You have survived our traditions. You have fought. You have won. But strength alone does not make one worthy. You must prove you understand our ways. Kai straightened. All right. What do you need from me? A warrior with scarred hands spoke next. A test of wisdom. You claim to be our equal, but can you think like a true warrior? Kai sighed. So, no punching this time. Velkaza whispered. Kai. Right, sorry. The scared warrior continued. Here is your challenge. Imagine you are commanding an army. You are surrounded by enemies, outnumbered. Victory seems impossible. Do you fight to the last breath, or surrender to survive? The hall fell silent. Kai rubbed his chin. It was a trap. If he said fight, they'd call him reckless. If he said surrender, they'd call him weak. He took a breath. Then he grinned. Neither, Kai said. Murmurs spread through the room. The council leader narrowed his eyes. Explain. Kai stepped forward. If I'm surrounded and outnumbered, that means my enemies think they've already won. I'd use that against them. Lure them into overconfidence. Find weaknesses in their formation. Set a trap. There's always another way to win. Silence. Then, to Kai's shock, one of the elders chuckled. Clever, the scared warrior admitted. He thinks differently than we do. Another council member nodded. That may be his greatest strength. Kai let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The council leader finally spoke. Very well. The trial is complete. The decision is made. Everyone tensed. Then, you are worthy. Velkaza exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing. Mirakai smirked. Taliza whispered, I knew it. Kai blinked. Wait, that's it. I passed. The leader nodded. You are not one of us. But perhaps that is exactly what our people need. Kai grinned. I like the sound of that. Velkaza turned to him. For the first time, there was no hesitation when she spoke. Welcome home. Kai felt something warm in his chest. For the first time, he truly believed it.